Hi, I'm Fran Maxime. Welcome to another episode of Soup to Nuts. Today we're actually going to be doing some desserts, and desserts are one of the things that a lot of people shy away from, and they think that sometimes that they're a little bit too difficult to make, and they're really not. And there are a lot of really nice desserts that you can do with fruits of the season, and I'm going to kind of do a different sort of different types of desserts for different seasons. We're going to be cooking some blueberry crisp, we're going to be making some apple cobbler, and we're also going to be making some strawberry cheesecake. So depending on what your palate is and what time of the year it is, you can try different things. So we're going to start out with the blueberry crisp, and the first thing that I've done is I have put some Jiffy Mix. Actually, it's sort of the same thing as Bisquick. You can put either Jiffy Mix or Bisquick in a bowl with about a cup of sugar, and you're going to use about 2 cups of Jiffy Mix, and then about 3½ sticks of butter. I like to use real butter, even though some people prefer margarine or light butter or whatever. If you're going to make dessert, you might as well make it well. So I'm just going to go ahead and dump this in the bowl, and you have a special tool here. I don't really know what the name of this is, but I just call it a crisper because it makes the crumbly topping, which is the top of the crisp. And basically, you're just going to mash this down. And it's going to take maybe a couple of minutes to get this to a consistency where you can actually see it being crumbly. But it's essentially the flour mixture, which is the Bisquick mixture, and then of course the butter, and then some sugar. And I'm going to pause for a minute and add a little bit of nutmeg and cinnamon for flavor. And this is pretty much something that you can just do to taste. You can add a little bit more if you want, or a little bit less if you like it a little bit more mild. So I'm just going to go ahead and sprinkle some in. This is the cinnamon. It may look like a lot, but it won't be so much when I mix it up. And this is a little bit of nutmeg. And then I'm just going to keep on mashing this together. And it's going to end up to look a little bit just clumpy and sort of crumbly. And it's already kind of getting that consistency already, you can see. And this is a nice thing to have with served warm with some ice cream, maybe on a warm, summer's evening, or maybe an early spring like we're experiencing now. And you can see this is really beginning to take the shape of the crisp, the crumbly topping. And if you have difficulty mixing it up with this, which is a tool that, like I said, you can find this pretty much at any local grocery store. They'll sell them for about $1 or $2. You can always put them in a commercial food processor or blender or some type of device that you may have at home. So basically, that's all I've done. I've just added the sugar, the Bisquick, and the butter, mixed it all up in a bowl, and now I'm going to take the blueberries, these are about 3 pounds of frozen blueberries. You could use fresh blueberries when they're in season over the summer. My grandfather always used to take me blueberrying, and so we would come back with piles and pints and quarts and bushels practically of blueberries. So we had fresh ones that we would use all the time. But these are frozen because it is a little bit early to be picking them, and they'll just work just as fine. And if you have fresh blueberries, like you've picked them like we used to, you can go ahead and freeze them if you want for future reference, so they don't go to waste. I'm just going to spread this out in the pan. What I've done is I've just put in some non-fat cooking spray in the pan. You really don't even need to do much of anything, because what's going to happen is the butter from this crumbly mixture is going to melt down, and it's going to prevent the blueberries from really sticking heavily. And since there's no bottom pie crust, you don't have to worry about maintaining that half, if you will, of the dessert. So I'm just going to go ahead and spoon this over. There are parts of it that may look a little bit floury still, but they'll cook down. There's enough butter here, and this is definitely enough to feed quite a few people. So this actually will probably take care of a party of 12. And then some. And if you serve it with a ½ gallon of ice cream or something like that, then that's a really nice dish. So I'm just going to even that out a little bit, just like a mound. The thing I love about these things, the cheesecake, the cobbler, they don't have pie crust. I hate pies. I can't make a pie to save my life, and I don't know who can. And that's one of those bad myths that like people are like, I can't cook dessert, and so I'm not going to do it because pies are tough because they can never get the crust right. So I just take away that problem from the equation, and I don't use a crust. I make things like a cobbler. So basically, I'm going to put this in the oven at 350 for about 45 minutes, and it's just going to cook very slowly, and when it's done, I'm sure it's going to taste great. I'm going to just pop this in here. Make sure the oven's at the right temp. And we can pretty much get started on our next dish, which is going to be the apple cobbler. And basically, this has some flour and some sugar, about 1.5 cups of flour and a little bit of sugar. And I'm just going to go ahead and mix in some eggs, 2 eggs. And this is going to be what we would just, use as the topping for the cobbler. And basically, you can use any kind of fruit, just as with the crisp. For a crisp, you could do a peach crisp, or an apricot crisp is really delicious if you can find apricots. Or sometimes people use sometimes like another kind of berry, like a blackberry or a boysenberry or something like that. And this is a little bit dry, so I'm going to add about 1/2 cup of milk. I'm actually not even going to measure it, but pretty much until it gets moist and wet and spreadable. You don't want it to be too doughy, but you want it to be spreadable enough so that you can spoon it over the apples. It's a little bit too doughy still, so I'm going to add a little bit more milk. And trust your instincts when you're cooking. I mean, if things don't really look right to you and you know that it's supposed to be a cobbler, which is typically a very sort of a thick crust on top and it's a little bit more bready, then, add a little bit more of the ingredients that you think. If it's too dry, add a little bit more milk if that's in the recipe so that it can be a little bit more wet. If it's too wet, then add a little bit more flour, and then you can always just, if it's too much of the mixture, you can always just set that aside. I'm going to put this aside for a minute while we mix up the apples. Now what I've done here is I've cut up about 6 these are Macintosh apples, but you can use whichever ones are in season. Cortlands are especially nice come September, October, apple season, November, or if you get anything for Christmas. A lot of times people send apples, typically for eating, not for cooking. You can use Golden Delicious or something like that as well, but I wouldn't really recommend a Granny Smith or a Red Delicious because those are really just eating apples. This is light brown sugar. I'm going to just put in, this is just a pound, I'm going to put in about half of this, maybe just over 1 cup of this light brown sugar. And just because this is what I like to do, I'm going to add some raisins, and I'm going to also add some pecans. And some people are, not a big fan of nuts, so you certainly don't have to put this in the recipe, but it's one of the few things that make a dessert a little special. And certainly if you're watching your budget, it also adds cost. So if that's a concern, you don't necessarily have to add it. Let me just open this up here. And these I just crushed a little bit in the bag. They were halved, and I just crushed them a little bit in the bag before I'm stirring them in here. And this isn't really going to be a very wet mixture because the apples are going to cook down and are going to make it a little bit more wet. And then I'm also going to add some raisins. And I'm a big fan of raisins. They're healthy, they're good for you. They add a lot of nice sweetness to the mixture. And basically it's another way of diversifying your dessert, if you will. But this is definitely one of those things that's sort of a fall day, sort of a Thanksgiving-ish type of a dessert that you might want to serve if you have guests over. Sort of a hearty type of dessert. You can see it's really looking nice. The colors are there, the nuts and the raisins. It's really sort of a wholesome looking mixture. And pretty much it is. It just has a little sugar in it, which is what makes it good to eat for dessert. Now, the last thing I'm going to do is just put in a little bit of this melted butter that I had into this mixture on top, and I'm just going to pour that in. That's about maybe less than a stick of butter, maybe about a half a stick of butter, 3/4 of a stick of butter. And basically, what that is going to let us do is just have a nice glaze on the cobbler topping, which doesn't really have a name, so I'm just going to call it cobbler topping. And then we're going to throw all of this into a square pan, which is right behind me. And it may be a little bit too much, so I may not put all of it in. I'm known for putting too much of everything and stuff, so if it looks like I'm making too much and you guys want to scale back at home, then go ahead. No. Looks good already, doesn't it? Just kind of want to eat it. And you don't cook the apples or anything ahead of time, like I said. So, and the other thing is that if you ever cut up apples ahead of time to save time, you can put lemon juice in there so that they don't turn brown, because a lot of times people are wondering, you know, they'll wonder how to do that. And lemon juice, actually, just on that note, has many uses. It's also really good for polishing brass. So if you ever have like brass earrings or brass jewelry even, sometimes it's one of the few very natural cleaners that we have at our disposal, most often in our kitchen, and not under the counter, but rather in the refrigerator. Okay, so that's kind of the cobbler. I'm just going to sprinkle on a little bit of nutmeg and cinnamon just so that it has a little bit of color on top. And this is the same kind of thing you can serve with some ice cream or something like that. And that's what that is going to look like. It's going to wash up a little bit. And then we're going to put this in the oven for about 15 minutes, I would say, at 350. And then we're going to turn it up to about 400 after that. So the next thing on our agenda is actually a really large piece. It's a cheesecake that I enjoy making a lot. It's really good for holidays like Christmas, or if you have just a lot of people over and you want to really impress them. It's a big dish that you can use to serve a lot of people. So what I've done is taken 5 packages of cream cheese, put them in the bowl, and what we're going to do is add about a half a cup of milk, which I've already poured. And you can add a little bit more if you need to have it be a little bit more wet. And I'm going to mix it with a blender. Which I have an old-fashioned kind of blender, but it really works, especially on something like this, because you need an industrial strength to get through this. And it helps if you can soften the cream cheese ahead of time by leaving it on the counter for about an hour, taking it out of the fridge a little bit earlier. They have a few different kinds of cream cheese now on the market, light cream cheese, and also new facto cream cheese, it's called, or it's actually just called new facto cheese. But I wouldn't recommend them because for this particular dish, you really have to wait. You kind of need the calories, I guess, for it to work because of the way that it cooks down. This is not for the weak at heart. You need to really kind of work this cream cheese in the bowl here. Can't be too timid about it, but it's not going to bite you. So make sure you have a nice high bowl on the side and you just keep working it. What I'm going to do now is start adding the eggs and add a little bit of vanilla. Vanilla never hurts a recipe, actually. I think it's one of the least used spices, if you will, or flavorings. But I'm going to, whoops, guess that one won't go in there. I'm going to use about 6 eggs, and I'm going to try to beat them in one at a time. That can kind of get to be tedious if you're in a rush, but give it a whirl and see if you can do it, because it just helps to have a more a mixture with a smoother consistency. Try to work around the sides a little bit. And you've seen probably some of the industrial strength mixing devices that, you know, people will have in a restaurant or a bakery. Obviously, that's not the case here. So you kind of have to use your elbow grease, as you will, to do this. But you can definitely get by with a conventional mixer. You just have to keep on doing it. And it's going to just get smoother and smoother. Even though it looks a little bit strange right now, it's just going to keep getting smoother, and I'm just going to use the spatula to kind of take it off the sides for a minute. And you just have to kind of fight with it until it gets through. And you can see it's getting lighter and lighter. I'm just going to add a couple more eggs. I don't know if that was 5 or 6, but I'm going to go ahead and put in another one because it's really not going to hurt it if there's one extra. And as soon as we get done with this, I'm going to make the bottom crust, which is basically a graham cracker crust. And it's really, if you want to use what they have, like a new chocolate graham cracker crust, that's fine. If you want to use a cinnamon graham cracker crust, which is what I've done, you can use that, and it basically just adds a little bit of extra flavor. Since it's going to be a strawberry cheesecake, sometimes people like to have the graham cracker crust because it's plain, but if you're making a chocolate cheesecake, they might use the chocolate graham crackers for the bottom. And that's pretty much the mixture right there. So I am just going to pop these off. It's all right, leave them. Set this aside for a second. And then I'm going to mix up the graham cracker crust. Now, this is basically a combination of sugar and crushed graham crackers. Nothing major. This is butter that I've melted. It's about 2½ sticks of butter that you can put together. And basically, I'm just going to go ahead and pour this in here. It's about, I don't know, maybe 1 package of graham crackers and maybe about a ½ cup of sugar. And there's a little bit much. Usually I make it in a larger pan, so there's a little bit too much of this mixture here. So I'm just going to go ahead and set that aside for the moment. And then I'm going to mix this together. Basically, it's just going to get moist. And we're going to pad that down into the springform pan. And I'll show you what that looks like. It's one of those tricky cooking pans that probably intimidate people when they think about making desserts, but it's really not a big deal. You can buy one at your local grocery store, and if you can find it there, then it's really not like only French chefs do it or something. It's actually quite easy. So I'll show you what this is. Comes apart, and basically the beauty of it is that it will, getting flour here, the beauty of it is that it will actually allow you to lift the cake up out of the pan without sacrificing the cake itself. You'll see that at the end when I lift it out, but this is actually covered with Teflon, so it's even a little bit more resilient towards sticking on the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in here. It looks nice and crumbly, and it just looks really good. I'm going to just pat that down. And it's going to maybe make about 1/4 inch crust, maybe a little bit more or less depending on how much you use. And you just want it to be as tight as possible because this is really forming the base of your cheesecake. So when you go ahead and serve it to people, you want it to be flat on the bottom. and tight, because as I mentioned before, it's not really a pie crust, so there's not a uniform crust on the bottom. It's a little bit crumbly, so the tighter that you pack it, the more likely it is that when it cooks, it's really going to congeal. That sugar is going to melt down and let it stick together. Now we are going to pour the lovely cheesecake mixture into the, getting myself all dirty, but we're going to get this pan filled up with this mixture here and basically spread it around. And the cheesecake is a really heavy dessert, so people, you know, probably don't need to eat a heck of a lot of it in order to be satisfied. But it's one of those things that if they like it a lot, they can freeze, actually, because it lasts for a long time, so you don't have to just be stuck with a wasted cheesecake in your freezer. I mean, in your refrigerator. You can freeze it. So I'm just going to spread that around. And basically, that's going to be cooked in the oven, I guess, at about 375 degrees for about an hour and 10 minutes. So you want to make sure that we have a good hot oven when you put it in there. God forbid you shouldn't, because otherwise it'll kind of melt down and cook slowly, and especially with this kind of a dessert, that doesn't. Hi, welcome back to Soup to Nuts, and you can see that some of our desserts are ready. First of all, we have the apple cobbler over here, and you can tell that it, you know, puffed up a lot, and it looks a little bit doughy, and it has a nice texture to it, a little bit of nutmeg and cinnamon over there. Over here we have the blueberry crisp, and it's just basically a little bit sunken in with a little bit of crisp over here, but underneath there is all crisp as well, and we can, you know, go ahead and cut that and see what that looks like. But I just wanted to go over the cheesecake because we have some finishing touches here before we actually serve the desserts. Now, because of the time of how long it takes to bake the cheesecake, about an hour and 10 minutes, we did this in a two-step process. This is an unbaked cheesecake that I poured, and what you would do is bake this in the oven for the hour and 10 minutes, and then you would go ahead and put a mixture of sour cream, this much sour cream, 1 pint, about a cup of sugar, and some vanilla in a bowl, mix it up, and then pour this over this cheesecake, and then you would bake it for another 10 minutes at about 400 degrees. I have already done that process, so we have what we look like when it's done, and that is this cheesecake over here. And you can see that the reason why we add that sour cream to it is because it sinks in when you're cooking the cream cheese, and it sort of has a concave quality. And you can see that this dark rim in here is basically just the cheesecake portion of it, the cream cheese portion of it, that has like a thick sort of a brown crust that's forming after you bake it. And then when you have taken it out of the oven, you go ahead and you put on that sour cream mixture, and it looks like this. Now, what I'm going to do is add the strawberries to the to this mixture, and these are frozen strawberries. I didn't go ahead and, you know, use fresh ones for this portion of it, because these are pre-sweetened and they're really easy to use, and they're tasty and people like them. And thank goodness it's convex and not concave, because we can go ahead and have the strawberries sort of sit in the middle of the cheesecake. And one of the best things to do, I'm doing this now, but one of the best things to do before you serve a cheesecake is to, you know, leave it in the fridge for a long time, or stick it even in the freezer for a little while, because it's a softer type of dessert, a little bit more dairy oriented. It's going to take a little bit, it's going to react to the heat. And now I'm going to spring the spring-form pan, and this is always a little bit tricky, so I'm going to go ahead and pop that. And you're going to see that it's going to take a minute to pull apart, but it's going to start pulling on that side. And then I'm going to just use my spatula over here to kind of release it from the side of the pan. And it's good to have some type of a dish underneath in the event that the in the event that the strawberries are going to spill over, because you don't want to have it be, you know, all over your countertop. But that's pretty much released now. And so I can go ahead and lift it up. Just got to be a little bit careful not to hurt the actual cheesecake. And that's kind of what it's going to look like. Now, you can add more strawberries to it. You can clean it up a little bit if you want. But what I like to do is just layer some fresh strawberries on top with the stems and all, just for color. And, you know, then people can go ahead and cut them with their own forks and knives and everything at home. But this just adds a little bit of a festive touch. And these, again, are, you know, best in season. But you can usually get decent ones at a grocery store, like a Bread and Circus or something like that, if you wanted to find them sooner rather than later. Go ahead and plunk these in the middle. And you can serve this, like I said, with ice cream or with whipped cream, whatever it is that you wanna do. So that's pretty much what the cheesecake is going to look like. And I'm just going to go ahead and cut a couple of pieces of apple cobbler and blueberry crisp, so you can just get a feel for what these are like. The cobbler is a little bit thicker. Just going to cut out a corner piece here so you can see that. See, it's still steaming. Has a lot of nice raisins and nuts and vegetables here. Not vegetables, rather, fruits and nuts at the bottom. And that's really a yummy, sweet kind of a dessert. And it's really good with some whipped cream or some ice cream. And then over here is the blueberry crisp. I'm going to go ahead and spoon out some of that. And that's a little bit of a softer consistency. It's almost kind of messy looking in a way. But you can add a little bit of ice cream to that, like I said, or a little bit of whipped cream, and it's going to really just even out the flavor and cut some of the sweetness of the blueberries. So essentially, those are the desserts for today. We have a whole bunch of them. Really sweet blueberry crisp, yum yum. Apple cobbler with pecans, raisins, and apples, of course. And then we have the mammoth strawberry cheesecake, which will pretty much serve an army. So if you have some people over for dinner, or if you want to entertain the troops at Christmas time, go ahead and cook up a cheesecake, because it'll certainly feed them all for dessert. Thanks again for watching Soup to Nuts.
Discover Ashland's own Channel 8, WACA-TV. As your local cable access station, we produce programs for and about Ashland. Young and old alike, volunteers from our town work together to produce programs that cannot be seen anywhere else on television. Our brand new studio is located at Ashland High School on West Union Street. The heart of our studio operation is here in the control room, where programs come to life. Special audio and video equipment is used by volunteers who've learned to operate the equipment by the Channel 8 staff. The studio is where many of our programs are videotaped. Here you can learn how to operate a television camera, learn the art of lighting, or even become the star of your own program. The editing suite is where you put all the pieces of your program together. It's like building a video puzzle. You can add a special effect, music, words, and graphics. In addition to video production, there are many other ways to get involved in Ashland's Channel 8. You can help at one of our community events, organize information for our community bulletin board, or help with work in our office. A fun and easy new adventure is waiting for you, and we're just around the corner. Stop by and visit. Take a tour of our new studio in person.
For more information, call 881-WACA.
Come right right down, make your own TV. Come on down and make your own TV.